Class 11, History, Chapter 2, Part 12, Audio by Renee Matthew. We saw the social hierarchy of the Roman Empire, and we had a look at how they did trade, they conducted trade, commerce, and all these things over Mediterranean Sea. Now a little bit of information on the monetary system of gold, and that was circulated in huge amount throughout late antiquity. So gold of this particular place was gaining lot of importance, and it was circulated at great amounts. So now here we saw that there is a great subdivision which happens in the society, starting from the senator, and it goes on to humiliores, that is a lower part of the class. And it is not that they did much of the labor force. It is about their treatment that we have to take note of, how the other part of the society treated them. And all these points were put forward by Tacitus, the great historian. Now more information on the industrial and mining establishments. There are 5 points given on the screen. Migrant workers provided much of the labor for grain and olive harvests, and also for building industry. So migrant workers were ones who moved from place to place. They used to come from other parts of the territory or other parts in and around Roman Empire. They came from other parts of the world to the Roman Empire. They were migrant workers. Second point is self-employed artisans. They were like fed better than wage laborers. Wage laborers, by the end of the day, you have to pay them wages. So self-employed artisans were fed better than the wage laborers. So their conditions were better. Then we have the casual laborers, especially in the big cities. So look at the segregation of the laborers itself, how they worked in the industrial and mining establishment. So as their hierarchy varied, the living conditions also varied. Then we have, of course, the thousands of slaves that were still found all over the Western Empire in particular. So that was more in number. Migrant workers, which worked for the industry and the harvest, especially grain and olive harvest, where you need a little bit of knowledge for all these trades. Self-employed artisans, large mass of casual laborers, and thousands of other slaves who were just common in number, and they were so outnumbered. There was a historian whose name was Olympiodorus. His picture is given on the screen. He was also an ambassador about what happened in the Roman Empire, and he tells us about the aristocracy, which was based in the city of Rome. And this particular aristocracy was so wealthy that they got an annual income of up to 4,000 lbs of gold from their estate. So rich. And not counting the produce they consumed directly. So directly they got some other amount also. This is indirectly. So indirectly the amount of wealth that they got was 4,000 lbs of gold. Very rich. So that was the account given by Olympiodorus. Now about the monetary system of the late empire, which broke. And that broke with the silver-based currencies of the first 3 centuries. It was a flop. It was a failure. Why? Because the silver mines, the Spanish silver mines, were exhausted. And because of that, the government ran out of sufficient stock of the metal to support a stable coinage in silver. So there were a lot of uprisings in the silver mines also, but apart from that, all the laborers were exhausted, and the government ran out of stock of this metal, silver itself. So that is why the monetary system of the first 3 centuries, that is using silver, collapsed. And nobody used silver after that. Now Constantine found a new monetary system. That is what I told you in the beginning of this audio. That was on gold. He found out a new monetary system on gold. And this particular system was in continuous circulation throughout late antiquity. People accepted, and the metal was also not scarce. It was in great demand, and you could see it, you could dig it out very easily from the underground. The next chapter, the next heading of this particular chapter is the late Roman bureaucracy. So both the higher and the middle echelons, that is the higher and the middle strata of the society, were very affluent, very wealthy. Affluent means very wealthy, because they got much of their salary in gold, and they also invested in assets like land. So already we saw that the middle class was rising up. They were growing in number, they got affluent, and they had so much of support from the senators. Do you remember that they depended on the senators for government formalities? Even the senators depended on the middle class for government duties, for making documents and all these kind of things, because the people in the aristocratic group, the senators, did not do any work in particular. They always had to depend on lower strata of the society. So that is why the middle class started growing, and their salary was paid in gold. So no wonder they could actually invest in assets like land. There was a great deal of corruption also, especially in the judicial system and in the administration of military supplies, because the army was really strong and they were also great, like they were very mighty, and nobody could even dare to command or kind of actually judge them or form any rivalry with them. So the judicial system was corrupted, and administration of the supplies for the military was also very sophisticated and complicated. Extortion of the higher bureaucracy, that is the higher and middle echelons, and the greed of the provincial governors were proverbial. So you can imagine how these people behaved. Extortion of the higher bureaucracy, that is, they were extorting money, so much of money and so much of wealth, and the provincial governors were also becoming greedy day by day. Now, the government intervened, they interfered repeatedly to put a stop to these forms of government. We know about them in the first place because of the laws that they tried to put an end to them. So they started passing laws saying that you shouldn't be undergoing or encouraging these kind of corruptions. They had passed several laws in the Senate. But what happened after passing the laws? And because the historians also have written about it, we are very sure of the laws and how the people responded to it. So still we have got the remains of the laws that were left behind on the papyrus and all that. And even the historians have recorded documents of the laws that were passed. And also other members of the intelligentsia, that is of the intellectual capacity, also wrote a lot about it. And they also denounced, they did not like these practices, they detested these practices. Who all? The historians, the law, and also some of the people of the intellectual capacity. Element of criticism. Now comes the element of criticism, which is a remarkable feature of the classical world. The Roman state was very authoritarian and also organized. It is very difficult to find an empire which is both authoritative and organized. So that was the quality of the Roman state. In other words, dissent was rarely tolerated. If anybody objected, if anybody suggested also, it was not tolerated. And the government usually responded to protest with violence. They did not tolerate if there was any kind of protest, not like the French people. Especially in the cities of the East, where people often fearless in making fun of emperors. So in the eastern part of the empire, they used to make fun of the emperor. But that was not tolerated. It was always tolerated with violence. Now there was a strong tradition of the Roman law which emerged by the 4th century, and this acted as a pause, as a break on some most fearsome emperors. Okay, so there was a big law which came about in the 4th century, and it acted as a pause or a break on many fearsome emperors. So they couldn't prolong with so much of corruption. And the kings were not allowed, or they were not free to do whatever they liked. And the law was actively used to protect civil rights. They were not free to do anything that they just liked, and they protected civil rights. That is why in the later 4th century it was possible for powerful bishops like Ambrose to confront equally powerful emperors. So now when this law was passed, The emperors had some restrictions, and it also protected the civil rights, I told you. So because of that, the bishops from the church, like Ambrose, the picture of Ambrose is given here. He was very powerful. He was as powerful as the emperor, and he could question the emperor when they were very harsh, repressive in handling the civilian population. Sometimes emperors were very harsh. They did not have justice when they acted. So because of all these reasons, the bishops were able to question. And that is because of the law which was passed. Alright? Okay. Now there was a cultural transformation of the Roman world in its final centuries. A big transformation took place. The late antiquity, that is a term which is now used to describe the final, fascinating period in the evolution. There was a breakup of the Roman Empire. That is the last part of the Roman Empire, the last part of the rule, and it refers broadly to the 4th up to 7th centuries, from 4 to 7 centuries. So that was a late antiquity, a particular period when people knew that the Roman Empire was going to decline. Of course, it was authoritative, it was skilled, it saw the best emperors of the world, it was organized also, but it was facing the late antiquity from 4th to 7th centuries, and ultimately the Roman Empire was going to have a breakup. Now what about the 4th century? It was one of the considerable ferment in both cultural and economic factors. It was declining continuously. There was the peak of fermentation. It was increasing so much. Now what happened at the cultural level? There were a lot of momentous developments, lot of continuous developments in religion, especially with the Emperor Constantine, to make Christianity the official religion. So that was the cultural aspect where Constantine was completely influenced by Christianity. We saw that in the introduction also. But the introduction was so high where it was moving at a rapid pace, and we thought that everything came to an end suddenly. It is not like that. Constantine decided to make Christianity the official religion. And with the rise of Islam, after Christianity, with the rise of Islam in the 7th century, there were important changes in the structure of the state itself, and that began with Diocletian from 284 to 305. And it may be best to start with these. So Diocletian had brought about a lot of changes, and that was the advent of Islam, the beginning of the religion of Islam. So this is what happened in 4th century up to 7th century. There was also overexpansion where Diocletian emperor wanted to cut back. He wanted to abandon some of the territories with little strategic or economic value, because it is very difficult to manage a whole empire, and he wanted to expand it further. Okay, and that, what did it finally lead to? When he wanted to expand, what happened? He was not able to manage everything. There was strategic or economic degradation which took place. He had to cut back. What did Diocletian do? Okay, this is a very important part in the history. He fortified the frontiers. He made it more stronger. He reorganized provincial boundaries. He organized everything again, especially the boundaries. He separated the normal people from military functions. It was not together anymore. Civilian apart from the military functions, granting greater independence or autonomy to the military commanders, and their name is duces. Earlier it was like they had more or less the same rights, similar rights, the civilians and military function people or the military cadets. But now it is like he granted more freedom to the military commanders. Was it dangerous with the duces? We don't know. And they became more powerful. When you grant more autonomy to the military commanders, what will happen? They will become more powerful. Then what happened? Constantine consolidated some of these changes. He was like very happy with what Diocletian did, and he also had made some changes to these changes, what Diocletian made, and he added some more changes to it. So Constantine was the last person. Okay, before that came Diocletian. Now his chief innovation in the monetary sphere was, who's Constantine? He made a great big change was to introduce a new denomination in the currency, and that is solidus. This is a picture of the solidus, the front and back part. You can see Constantine, the picture is also there.